in food insecurity, and if we look at Africa, the food insecurity situation, I mean, it was a 60% increase in food insecurity in the region last year.
So it seems like it's going from bad to worse.
Yes.
And in terms of you're both dealing with both a humanitarian situation, but also operating in a conflict zone. For children, what does that mean?
I mean, children, I think for them, of course, this country has been facing a lot of challenges even before the conflict. And with the conflict, the situation is getting worse in every area, I would say, with more children being out of school, more children being married early, food insecurity and lack of future. I think for children, what we need to do is to provide immediate help and make sure that they get access to what they need to survive and be educated, but also invest in long-term solutions. Because I think we talked about how the world is changing and the shrinking space and the increased humanitarian crisis in the world. And what I'm worried about is that we are focusing so much on the humanitarian crisis that we forget the long-term development. And going back to Afghanistan, I mean, with all the governments withdrawing their support to the government, we talk about billions of dollars, and the humanitarian response will only be a small percentage of that. So there is an absolute need to do both the long-term investments and the humanitarian responses. And I think that's the way that we are creating a future for children.
Between the promises made by rich countries and their actual fulfillment, there's a huge gap. They promise billions of dollars, but in reality, maybe there's $100 million or something like that. I mean, this gap in funding, first of all, why is it happening? Why are they not fulfilling their commitments? And what consequences does that have in terms of children who need help?
The funding gap is an absolute challenge. Why they are not fulfilling their promises, I think you need to ask them. Due to COVID conflict and the climate crisis, we see that a lot of the progress we've seen in the last 20 to 25 years are now reversed. So the situation have never been as serious as it is today, and that is what we are telling them. We are telling them about the situation being bad even before COVID and climate and conflict, and that is only becoming worse. So I think we have a very strong case, because we have millions of hundreds of millions of children out of school worldwide. We have the worst food insecurity crisis that we've ever seen coming in many countries around the world, and as I talked about before, the number of children being married as children is also increasing, and 22,000 children die every year because of early childbirth, and that's 60 children a day.
Now, in terms of child marriages and even trafficking, there's a lot of trafficking of young girls out of Burkina Faso to neighboring countries such as Côte d'Ivoire and elsewhere. What are you doing to tackle these issues?
I'm going to return to the education answer, but because that is the answer.
But schools are closing down, as you explained.
Yeah, but we need to make sure that they are reopening, and we need to make sure that we are giving them temporary education possibilities and options. So, and that's what we do. I mean, in some of the areas where we work, we are working with the current schools to make sure that they can take in more of the internally displaced children. But we are also making sure that we are providing non-formal or informal education to support the children that do not have access to school, or to support them and work more. But also, of course, when it comes to child marriage, it is about providing an option. It is about education. It is about poverty. So we are also doing quite a lot of cash transfers to make sure that families can get by, and that they can buy food and buy clothing and everything that they need to survive. And then they might not feel that they are forced to marry off their girls. But then it's also about legislation, it's about the mindset shift and norms and values. So we're trying to address all these at the same time.
Now, the United Nations has reported about sexual violence against young girls, not just by armed groups, but also by people that are meant to protect those young girls, whether it be UN peacekeepers. I've been in Central African Republic, where we've met 12-year-old girls that could recognize the tattoo of the regiment of the French soldier that had abused her. We spoke to the lawyers that were defending these young girls. All of the cases that they put forward to judges and to the tribunal were dismissed, even the ones by Paris prosecutors. The lawyer told me, imagine if there was African soldiers in Paris violating young French girls, how the world would react. And yet here there seems to be an element of impunity. Why is that? And are you doing anything to address that?
That's a very serious situation and completely unacceptable. And as you say, we've seen too many situations where this has happened, and where the people that are here to protect people are the perpetrators and violating them. So it is absolutely part of what we are trying to address. There's quite a lot of collaborations around humanitarian responses. So Save the Children is part of one of these big coalitions, and one of our core focuses is safeguarding of children, because we need to make sure that children are always safe when we are engaged, and we also need to make sure that they are safe when they are engaged with others. So this is completely unacceptable. We need to hold people accountable for what they do, regardless of where it happens, and sexual violence against children is never accepted, nowhere, and by no one.
And yet there's so little prosecution happening. I mean, there's been a lot of scandals here in Africa about aid agencies being involved in sexual, exchanging aid against food. There's been scandals even at Save the Children at a corporate level, Save the Children UK, about sexual harassment. And there's, if you speak to people in the streets, there's this notion and there's this fear of these white, aging males that come to Africa to save children, and yet that are, some of them, abusing the children that they're meant to protect. What is being done to address this?
So internally, we spend a lot of time addressing this, because, as I said, every child needs to be safe when they are around Save the Children. So for us, it's about having zero tolerance, it's having the right policies in place, it's about holding people internally accountable, making sure that people report even the smallest thing that is done, and making sure that we act if things happen. And I don't think we can never prevent things from happening, but we can always make sure that we are doing everything we can to minimize it, and also that we respond when it happens and hold people accountable and support the victims. In Save the Children, we haven't had cases of as the ones that you described, with our people abusing children, but we did have a sexual harassment scandal between staff, and so that's also something that we spend a lot of time addressing in the last few years, because that's also something that is not acceptable. It should be safe for staff and children to be part of our work.
What about, governments? Are you holding governments accountable for their staff or their involvement in sexual harassment, sexual abuse?
One of the things that we as an organization focus on is of course holding governments account for every violation of children's rights, and this is one of the violations. So in our work on advocacy and making sure that we are pushing and working with governments to improve their accountability for children's rights is absolutely very high on the agenda, and this is one part of it.
I think we need to spell it out for our viewers. Yeah. What are those children's rights? What are the rights that our children, in whichever country they are in this world, what do they deserve, and what are their rights?
There is a convention of the rights of the child, but of course I will not go into the details around that. But it's mainly about making sure that children are safe, that children are protected from violence, abuse, etc., that children have the right to health and the right to education, the right to an identity, and a number of things like that.
How much is the humanitarian crisis that we're seeing in the Sahel due to climate change? Has climate change a role in the conflicts that we're seeing in the Sahel? We're seeing herders fighting with farmers.
No, but I would say that many of the conflicts we see in the world, including in this region, are affected by climate, because the resources are getting more and more scarce, and the conflicts are arising due to that.
So climate shocks is something that you're wary of in the future?
Absolutely, because we do know that climate shocks and climate risks will lead to challenges in people's everyday life here and now, but it is also an increased risk for conflict due to that.
And we've talked a lot about how dire the situation is for many young children, but there are some that make it out. How do they make it out? What are the tools that help them to survive and to make it out given the circumstances of the picture that you've drawn for us?
I think one of the most important things that we can do to support children is to help them build their own resilience, and education is one part of it, but not the full story. The other day I met a girl here in Bukinafaso who shared her story about how she was married off when she was 12 years old to a 54-year-old man. He already had 4 wives, and she was promised to him at birth. She was forced to marry him. She managed to escape because she wanted to finish school. She walked for days. She walked 40 kilometers. She was then found and brought back to her husband. And he told her that he would chain her until she gave him a child. She managed to escape again, and again walked for days until she came to a center where they were protecting child brides. And now she is studying to become a nurse. And when I asked her what her advice is for other children, it is to be courageous, to believe in yourself and never give up. And I think we need to make sure that we are giving children that ability to fight for themselves and their right, because that is what will help them. And they are incredibly resilient, but we need to support them to be able to do their part of and get out of the very difficult situations.
If you have any message to give to some of the children that are maybe watching this program and are facing challenges, whether it be food insecurity, sexual abuse, or any other challenges that young children are facing, especially in the Sahel region or in other areas of conflict, what would be that advice that you would give them?
I will quote the girls that I spoke to earlier this week, because I asked them what their advice would be, and they said, and I say the same, make sure that you do everything in your power to get a proper education. And if you're in a difficult situation, ask for help, because there's a lot of people that are willing to help and support you.
Inger Ashing, Chief Executive Officer